Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're diving into why early cuneiform basically looked like bookkeeping. We're taking a fascinating, totally hype-free look at the true origins of one of the greatest inventions in human history, writing. It turns out the beginnings of cuneiform were, well, surprisingly pragmatic. So let's just jump right in and see how sheer necessity drove this incredible innovation. When you or I imagine the dawn of writing, our minds usually drift toward the dramatic, right? We picture sweeping epic stories, beautiful poetry, or these grand royal decrees carved into stone to proclaim a king's eternal glory. But the historical reality was profoundly different. Early writing wasn't born from some sudden artistic urge. Nope. It functioned essentially as an ancient accounts department. The earliest surviving written documents aren't capturing myths of gods and heroes, they are tirelessly tracking grain, livestock, and labor. It was a system built for bookkeeping, not storytelling. And honestly, understanding that shift in perspective completely changes how we view the actual utility and value of writing itself.
So, let's set the stage a bit. We're looking at southern Mesopotamia, right around the late 4th millennium BC. Picture a landscape where large, complex institutions are just beginning to take shape and grow in power and scope. As these institutions expanded, they hit a massive administrative roadblock. Human memory is incredibly fallible. When you're dealing with a huge influx of goods and this vast network of obligations across a growing city, you can no longer just rely on someone remembering who owes what. It just doesn't work. And this is exactly where and when people began developing proto-cuneiform. It was an absolutely ingenious technological solution designed specifically to help these large institutions remember quantities and obligations over time. Literally, it was the ultimate external hard drive for the ancient world's administration.
And what exactly were they storing on that ancient hard drive? Well, the surviving clay tablets are just filled with endless records of grain, stuff like barley and emmer. We see highly detailed counts of animals, logs tracking workers, and records managing the daily distribution of rations. Get this. One of the earliest known recorded names in all of human history isn't a mighty king or some conquering general. It's an accountant named Cuneiform who signed off on a tablet tracking a massive shipment of barley. This wasn't just a casual tally on a napkin. This was a comprehensive economic database. These records allowed the institutions of southern Mesopotamia to function on a scale that would have been completely impossible otherwise. Because at the end of the day, tracking rations and labor is the absolute bedrock of keeping a large society fed and organized.
Okay, so how did they actually create these records? The process was wonderfully tactile and relied entirely on materials they just had readily available. First, a scribe would take a piece of damp clay, forming it into a little tablet that could easily fit right in the palm of their hand. Then, instead of using ink or a brush, they utilized a simple cut-reed stylus. Now, early on, scribes would use this to drop pictographic signs and make numerical impressions directly into the soft surface. But gradually, they realized drawing takes too long, so they replaced those drawn signs with impressions made by simply pressing the edge of that cut-reed stylus into the clay. This quick, repetitive action formed distinct, wedge-shaped impressions. It was highly efficient, it used cheap, abundant materials, and once that clay dried in the baking sun, the administrative record was essentially set in stone.
Now, this system didn't just appear overnight. It was a slow, very deliberate evolution. Back in the 3000s BC, we start with literal pictographs of the grain or the livestock being counted. But over the centuries, as I mentioned, drawing pictures became way too slow for busy scribes. The script had to adapt. Those initial pictures evolved into the increasingly abstract, angular, wedge-shaped marks we now recognize as cuneiform. And here is where the massive, real game-changing leap happens. Eventually, this highly efficient system of abstract marks was adapted to represent spoken language much more fully. Once it could capture the nuances of speech, it became incredibly flexible. It was adapted for several different languages across the region. And finally, we start to see the emergence of literature, diplomacy, royal inscriptions, and complex legal texts. A humble bookkeeping tool had completely transformed into a vehicle for human expression.
So the fundamental takeaway from all of this is incredibly clear. Writing became valuable because it made complex organizations easier to manage. Just imagine the bustling streets of those ancient Mesopotamian cities, filled with traders, artisans, and massive, overflowing storehouses. Without the ability to reliably track labor and goods, these vast institutions simply could not have scaled up or even survived. Writing proved its worth in those crowded, dusty storerooms long before it ever proved its worth in the grand royal court or the quiet poet's study. It was a tool of management first, and the whole shebang, everything else, followed from that immense practical success.
Which brings us to a final thought to chew on. We've seen how the mundane administrative records of ancient Mesopotamia actually tell us the fundamental truths about how their society was organized and what they truly valued. So, if someone dug up our society 5,000 years from now, what record would tell future archaeologists the most about us? Would they learn more about our daily reality from our award-winning movies and best-selling novels, or from our server logs, our global shipping manifests, and our tax databases? It's a pretty fascinating way to reevaluate our own world through the lens of the past. Thank you so much for walking through this explainer with me. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the data, and I'll catch you next time.